Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the KLNS Rugby Podcast as we return with a bumper recap show as South Africa snuck the first punch of the series, running out 27-20 victors in Loftus versus Felder Pretoria. With me this afternoon to reflect on the fierce and frenetic opening test in Pretoria are Irish fans David Cordial and Owen Harrison and South African fan and podcaster Thala and Owen. Welcome back to the show, gentlemen. It's been a while for some, not as long for others.
Listen,
We sorry, there's a bit of a delay there on the line. That's probably on me. Before we begin, want to get a quick summation of the action. Now, Thala was with us after Ireland won in the World Cup. So I think it's only fair that we let him do the honors of to how this game went. Thala, in terms of the summary of this game and how it unfolded, your initial thoughts and just kind of if you want to run through it for people who may not have seen it.
It was. I think it was a special game in many ways. Obviously, as you guys saw from it was basically the homecoming of the world champions, our first home game since the Rugby World Cup. Obviously, as we saw during the weeks or the months before this game, there's a big rivalry, maybe one-sided rivalry with Ireland right now. And yeah, it was a match that definitely the Springbok team and the fans wanted to win and had to win almost, and at least they did. So yeah, the game was. It started with the Springboks having a strong start with the Curtly Irons to try, and it looked like at least in the first 30 minutes that the Boks could get away from the game because it was about it got up to 10 points to 3, and Ireland were looking like they were just almost fading in the game, missing tackles, not really getting into the game much. It seemed like there's a lot of one-off running when they had the ball. Then out of nowhere, almost the try from Jamie Osborne through just amazing skill from Dan Sheehan and James Lowe gets them back into the game. It's 13 points to 8 going into halftime. And then in the third quarter, some of the most sloppy rugby, I think, from the Springboks, just not really getting into gears. They have a new coaching team. They're trying a new attack, so that's maybe part of it. It's the first test. As South African fans, always know the first test in South Africa is always a mess. So it became like a match where the Ireland were getting more into during the second half, and then in the second half there were obviously two big important decisions from upstairs. The disallowed try from James Lowe that could have leveled the scores, and then about 5 minutes later, Cheslin Colby scores a try from another sort of TMO review of the ball being tapped in by James Lowe from a penalty kick. And then it just became like last quarter became crazy. It was just a try fest essentially. So Colby scores, and then Ireland scores through Conor Murray through that brilliant move from the goal line dropout. Then it's the penalty try from the Springbok scrum, and then finally Ryan Baird. Yeah, Ryan Baird scores in the corner at the end. Yeah, I think in summary, a game that the Springboks, the positives of the Springboks won. There's a bit of growth with the attacking game plan. It's quite expansive. It's going touchline to touchline. Um, the negatives from a Springbok perspective are the rucks. We still haven't really found a way to stop or nullify Caelan Doris and Tyke Burnett, especially. We haven't really found a way to give ourselves clean ball. And the defense did sort of fall apart in the second half. I don't think, although the bench was effective for that try, I don't think the bench maybe had that much effect in terms of the general gameplay. But yeah, it's a good win. It's a good start to the test season. We roll on to Durban.
Yeah, it's certainly a good start for South Africa in that regard because as well, without sounding too disrespectful, like the first test against Wales was more of a hit out and more of a training session and just getting minutes. This one was a proper test intensity game, and you could see it from the off. And David, I'll come to you because from an Ireland perspective, you could look at this and feel like it was a massive opportunity lost. A great chance was there. They didn't take it. They looked tired and things like that. But what's your overall thoughts kind of out of the heat of the moment, I suppose?
my overall thoughts. I think at the time of the end of the game, it did feel like an opportunity lost. I think there was a point at the start of the game after Curtly Irons had ran in that excellent try. Jamie Osborne probably won't want to see that back, but in his defense, it's very hard to stop Curtly Irons at 1-on-1. I thought in that moment there was a little sneaking feeling that this might get away from us, and the fact that that didn't turn out to be the case almost adds to the frustration that it felt like this game was there for us. I was looking back over the actual match stats, and it was just incredible how incredibly balanced this match was. I checked in three places because I couldn't fully believe this, but in terms of tackle stats, our tackles and our missed tackles were exactly even. We tackled each other, I think it was 137 and 21 respectively from both teams. Kicks from hand were even, penalties were even, cards were even, possession and territory, I think there was about a 2% deviation off of even. This is 1 and 2 in the world, and it looks like that, as scrappy as it looked, and it as scrappy a game as it turned out to be. And it was an interesting game in terms of the mindset of both teams as well. It's Ireland very much coming to the end of their season, whereas the Boks are kind of starting theirs, the Rugby Championship later in the year. So I thought in the end, it's going to be a game that we're going to have looked back on and think, geez, we almost beat the Boks up in the high belt. It's not an easy thing to do. But I think there'll be a lot of positives to take out of it from Ireland as well. I thought our phase play attack was very good. It was 3 tries each, including the penalty try for South Africa. But all 3 of Ireland's tries came from open play. We had the initial one from Osborne. We had the ruled off one from James Lowe. We had Conor Murray's excellent run through the middle. That was the kind of attack we haven't really seen from Ireland in a while. But that was a very nice move pulled off. Murray with the pass from the base, the deception in for Kelleher to make the break, and then Murray running an excellent support line. Like that is classic phase play attack. That was really nice to see. And then the finish from Ryan Baird in the end, once again, James Lowe just being able to hold up 2 defenders on the side to give Baird space on the outside. So I think there's a lot of positives from Ireland's attack to take from that. I just think it's going to be a game that they're going to look back on with a little bit of chagrin that they didn't seal it out in the end, because it was there. From the Boks point of view, it wasn't a perfect performance, but it was a win. And at the end of the day, that's where the buck stops. And I think there was a lot of talk in the run up from commentators, from head coaches and the likes. And I think, I don't know if that got to the heads of the players, but if it did, it didn't really show. I think the Boks can now, move on to Durban happy in the knowledge that if there was anyone who was ever in any doubt that they're top dogs, that's been put to bed now. So I thought, yeah, it was a fantastic game, very evenly balanced, and I'm looking forward to Durban.
I think it might be just time for them to focus on Cape Town against New Zealand, the only other team who think they're better than South Africa at the moment. Just focus on that. It's fine. Forget about Durban. But Thala, I want to jump back to you there for a second, because David mentions Ireland's attack, and I might get into that in a few minutes. But South Africa's early days under Tony Brown, it wasn't perfect, but at the same time, it was pretty good. A lot of deception, a lot of layers, a lot of options. It looked like a new era starting to just find its way in there.
Yeah, it's funny because it's almost a new old era, because I was watching on our SuperSport, the cable broadcaster provider for sports in South Africa. They were showing the 2016 Test series, and that was the first Test series where Alistair Coetzee was the coach, and obviously Ireland almost beat us. And there's so many similarities between how the Boks attacked in 2016 to how they attack now. There was basically a 1-3-3-1 they were playing. They were trying to have interaction between forwards and backs, and trusting the forwards with their attacking skills, their passing, their handling, in order to get a lot of width into the attack. The only problem is trying that almost fresh with a newish team versus trying it with an established team that's obviously double world champions, a lot of experience in the combinations. I think that's where it was in its failing almost in 2016. Whereas now with this more confident team, it's working a lot better. So, but regardless of that, I think the way that Tony Brown plays is, I think there's Squid Rugby said these things and everything, but like there's almost a shape, and the shape gives you options, and it's basically just about picking the right options at the right time. I mean, similar to how Ireland attacks in some ways, and we saw that with the Conor Murray try. There's about 2-3 options that the ball carrier has to pass to, if not to go themselves. And it's about picking the right person, showing the variations and the skill with that. And we saw it with the first try, excuse me, with Curtly Orense. The forward's ability, or the team's ability actually to go from touchline to touchline, to stress the Irish defense, to trust the handling and the passing of players forwards or backs. Khaleesi basically giving the pass that puts Orense away. Like, that's a great thing to look forward to. The disadvantage though with how with South Africa attack there is it does leave you open in the rucks. And I saw that in the 2016 game that I was watching earlier this week, and I saw this again on Saturday. And Ireland I think that's been the one thing that the Springboks haven't really gotten their heads around when playing Ireland, is that, yes, the Springboks have obviously great proponents in the ruck, but Ireland just seems to get their hands, feet, legs, shoulders, knees, and toes basically interrupting any sort of good ruck board. And they're able to do that and to disrupt as much as possible. Luke Pearce is someone that allows carnage in the rucks, for lack of a better term. But we need to find a way that if we're going to play from touchline to touchline, we need our forwards and backs to be switched on to the threat of the tackler or the second person entering the ruck and be able to clean them out. Because the problem with the attacking game plan we saw in 2016, 2017 is it leaves you open to turnovers. And if you're not going anywhere and there's not that common sense with your kicking game and your racking, it leaves you under pressure. So we saw the good parts of it early in the game. And I think in the second half, maybe the team started to tire. Maybe it was just getting a bit more frazzled. Then obviously a few mistakes happened, but also credit to the Irish defense, which is obviously one of the best defenses in the world. They gave us close to nothing after that that try at the start.
Yeah, no,
Just
I'd
on that,
agree.
Thala, I think, sorry, just
Yeah,
on that,
go on.
Thala, what I was really impressed with Tony Brown's attack was the way that they not just went sort of east-west, touchline to touchline, but what they were doing on the touchline. It wasn't the winger carrying the ball and then Peter Steff or Sia looking to ruck and secure it. They were actually using the flankers to actually carry the ball and then having the threat of the offload or the pass. And what that puts is the way that the system seems to be set up, certainly from my initial viewing, was you have a flanker on either side, but the most important person within that is Quagga, because Quagga sits in the middle of those pods and he is the one who is determining and is sort of expected to resource the rucks on either side. So he has to have a huge engine to keep following that and try and do it. And the other thing that the Boks did really well was Willie LaRue coming in, because he was effectively playing as a 12 yesterday. So if you watch that back, when they went through their phase play, he showed up on Pollard's shoulder. So he extended that playmaking option. But what that was doing, and they moved Ireland around so well, was when LaRue popped up, it forced the wingers to pull up on the outside, which created more space for Osborne to cover, and he had to shift around. So Osborne, they would bring Willie LaRue in, they would attack generally James Lowe's side, I thought, with either kicks or passes to go down. They'd draw him up, bring Osborne over, and then it's the swing back to the far side when you're looking at Sia and Curtly Alansa on that side to create the space. And that's how the first try was really well worked. So for me, I think there's real positives, but as you said, it's that how do you supplement Quagga's role in terms of resourcing those rucks when you're going so far touchline to touchline? And I think that's the one thing that they have to sort of rectify next week to get that security and really change what they want to do and get it more consistent.
Yeah, no, and it's funny you say that on, because I was kind of thinking there, when Ireland's attack is at its best, probably the most underrated component is our fullback in Hugo Keenan, because not only does he have those very good trail lines, his breakdown work is fantastic. And we've seen with Ireland, the likes of Jack Crowley's hitting rucks, and people use that as a slight, but ultimately, who's better at ruck time? Is it Crowley or is it Osborne? It is probably Crowley. That's just nature of it. And Ireland did kind of miss him when they got to those wider exchanges at times, because the ball presentation just wasn't as good when you're relying on Peter O'Mahony and Josh van der Fleer, who were kind of bullied a small bit by their opposing men to be those edge forwards. And Dan Sheehan had already come off at this stage in the second half then as well. It does look a little bit frazzled. And because I mentioned Sheehan, I might just jump into the set piece here with your cell phone. Like scrum, Ireland's first half scrum, brilliant. Top Porter and Furlong, they won their matchups. Second half, or at least with Bealham and Healy, not so much, and the line out disappointing. And it feels like we're just having the same conversations for a while now, especially with line out time. It's just not at the standard it needs to be.
No, the line out isn't at the standard, and it's been there for probably a bit over 12 months, maybe even a bit longer. And I think part of that comes down to number one, teams starting to figure us out a bit. I think number two, it comes down to fundamentally to a pack build, and particularly where we've moved since the World Cup and onwards. Because you look at that Ireland pack build, and you start with the back five in the pack. You've got we'll start in the back row. Josh van der Fleer is not a line out option. Caelan Doris is a very limited line out option. You've got Joe McCarthy, who is in there to play a role that we're talking about the Boks here. It's very similar to what the Boks would have wanted from Dwayne Vermeulen. They want a big, heavy, carrying player who can disrupt and is a disruptor and is a strong carrier. So, but we're playing that in a second row who adds very, very little at line out time. You then have Peter O'Mahony, who, with the best will in the world, is a fantastic counter jumper, great spring. He's 6'3", 6'4". You got Ty Byrne, who is a hybrid lock, 6'5", 6'6". You're going into it with effectively two line out options and guys who are undersized compared to the opposition that you're going with. So that means you have two pods. And I think teams have worked out, particularly since the World Cup, you put someone up at 2 and you mark the other pod, you can put Ireland under pressure. And that's before you get maybe into real technical details around maybe the likes of Sheehan's throwing. And you look at, he has a very good tight spiral, but I think the flight of it is very low. It's very shallow. He doesn't necessarily have that lob that he can get. And that sort of narrows down. So Ireland are reliant on timing, on runs. And I think once they start to get spooked within the lineout and they're under pressure, they revert to either the front or to these shorter sort of 4 or 5 man lineouts with some sort of a routine where they can limit what the opposition are doing in pods, so that they try and work something.
And I might just jump in there for 2 seconds because I've felt for quite a long time the best line-out caller in Ireland is Ian Henderson for that very reason you mentioned. Because when things go wrong for Ty Byrne and James Ryan, as you said, they'll go into a routine. They'll call an awful lot on themselves, and that's not necessarily the wrong thing to do. But if you keep calling on yourself as well at line-out time, it's going to get predictable. We've seen South Africa were ready for that line-out at the front of the line with about 10 minutes to go that Peter Steph-Totoy intercepts from Ryan Baird's hands, and you're thinking, like, you could see that coming. You could see that Ireland were just going to go back to basics, going to go to the front. There was no deception. Baird gets beaten at the front. Like, there is something to be said for, do we have our best line-out caller on the field off the bench? No. Do we have our best thrower off the bench? No. Peter Manny's already gone off. And that probably ties into it a small bit. When you're already, there's already going to be fatigue errors there across. Anyways, that maybe someone like Henderson is what's missed on that bench. Perhaps, maybe not.
Yeah, and I think, as I said, to me, it comes back to pack build, because I think what we're doing, and it goes probably beyond that into team build, and you can work it out from there. But I mean, like, we've got a second row that we're asking to play a number 8's role, a power number 8's role. We've got a number 8 that and don't get me wrong, like, I'm not saying these are bad players, but I'm just talking about the roles that they're asked to play. Doris is asked to play 6, 7, 8. He's asked to play across it. You're asking your number 6 to become your line-out option because you don't have one in the second row. You're asking thankfully we have, the South African Toyota is prepared to develop some of our team because, we have the emerging Ireland tours. They're willing to pay for that because we're not getting that. We have Andy Farrell looking to get hybrids, utility players, and trying to force them into a team. You've got Jamie Osborne trying to play fullback when he has no experience of it. You've got Kieran Frawley, who, is being shifted all around the place and just trying to play those positions. We're using two centers as effectively back rows to get us over the game line because we're not picking ball carriers in the back five of the pack. And there's all these things that go. We seem to be trying to build, to me, we seem to be trying to build a pack for a World Cup to have all these lovely utility players that can do different roles and things. Whereas I think if you want a big ball carrying number 8, pick a big ball carrying number 8 and let him do his job. If you need a line out option, find someone who can jump in the line out. I mean, it's not exactly rocket science, but Ireland seem to be going around doing it the wrong way. And more so, they're trying to do it the wrong way by developing these players at national level and on national time rather than actually doing it in the provinces. Because there is no alignment between what is happening at provincial level and what is happening at national level. And I'm not blaming Farrell because Andy Farrell has a job to do and his job is to win now. And if he thinks his best player is there and should be there and needs to be Osborne at fullback, brilliant. But the O'Cullen also has to decide what's best for him. But the guy in the middle is David Nusafora, and he has to align those two, right? So someone has to figure out how that's aligned and stop this idea of trying to train and get experience for players at national level to fit it in, because it's just not working.
And ultimately, parts of the Irish under-3 landscape, I'll put it that way, were so critical of Joe Schmidt for this very thing. There was so much alignment. Like every player in Ireland knew where they stood under Joe Schmidt. Andy Farrell takes different. Whether you agree with that or not is everyone's like that's your own prerogative. Personally, I think there's something to be said for that. And maybe that ties into it. Maybe what Joe Schmidt had when there's only 4 provinces, maybe that's the right idea. Thala, I know you want to jump in here, so I might just let you go before I move on.
Yeah, I was thinking of this number 8 that is also a big carry ball option and a big line out option. I wonder if there's someone that can play there that plays in red every week. But my
David,
question
does David know the answer? I wonder. We get an objective set of eyes.
It's Brian Gleeson, isn't it? It's Brian Gleeson.
Yeah. He's in South Africa, so you could play him. My question was, and I think you broke it down really well, but the Ireland lineout was fantastic in 21 and 22. So is it just a matter of teams have just worked it out and worked out the deficiencies? Do you think that's basically the problem there?
Well, I think some of it comes down to it's been worked out, but some of the other option for me is I think the lineout is better with Kelleher coming off the bench because you also have James Ryan coming off the bench to replace Joe McCarthy. And you have Ryan Baird coming in a like for like with Peter O'Mahony. So once the subs start to roll on, you go from having 2 line-out options to 3 line-out options. And I think that gives more variation and you can work with that. To me, that has allowed it to become better. But I think there is still issues in terms of being worked out. And as I say, with a flat throw from Sheehan, which means that we're limited to 2 and 4. We can't really go to the back that often, particularly when there's competition in it. It's a much riskier proposition.
No, I agree there. And I think the set piece is an important discussion because people could listen to this and say, where was this conversation back in February or March? But we were having this conversation because it was an issue for Ireland. First game against France, lineup was flawless. From there on in, there was mistakes. And like it's important to note as well, Rob Herring's been injured. He's the most experienced hooker, probably the best thrower. Ronan Kelleher has had shoulder injuries, which for a hooker is an absolute nightmare. You know, we mentioned the likes of, say, Joe McCarthy isn't a jumper. Peter O'Mahony has spent time on the sideline this season, and that all ties into itself. But at the same time, it's been there since last year. It's been there since last year's Six Nations. We had the same conversation. So it's important to address it. But despite all this, I still think, and I said this in the preview, I think Ireland may have got their plan right, but their execution wrong, insofar as that first 20 minutes played out exactly how I thought. Granted, didn't think South Africa would score such a beautiful try after 3 minutes, but them's the break sometimes. But I thought Ireland did exactly what they thought. They kicked well. They really tested the edges with their kicking game. And I think, Owen, you'll definitely remember from when Munster went to Loftus and Jack Crowley tried those kind of high-hanging crossfield kicks that are just sitting up there. Like there's snow on them coming back down. They tested Quadra Smith off the restart with those. They tested Aronson and Colby. Thought the kicking game was really good. Craig Casey kicked really well. I can only think of maybe one kick in the entire game, and that was James Lowe clearing down Willie LaRue's throat, that I thought, okay, that was the wrong option. Where they kept it in field, where I thought just get the ball off field. That was the only one that comes to mind in the entire game. Set piece was a worry. We'll get onto the bench in a minute. I want to ask yourself, David, about that in just a minute. I actually thought that Ireland's attack was quite good. They weren't winning their individual collisions. We've seen that with Bundy. We've seen that with Joe McCarthy, with Porter, with Doris. The latter two, who I believe are kind of potentially being asked to do a bit too much around the park for Ireland at this stage, and I think that's affecting them there. But you see the 3 tries. Crowley skip past to Sheehan, lays it off to Lowe. That's a very similar system try to what we scored against the All Blacks in 2022. The try that Conor Murray scores, very similar system and scheme to what we scored against France last year. And the Baird try is similar to what we did against Scotland 2 years ago, where Lowe just holds it up on the edge and offloads with someone coming around the corner. I think Ireland's attack did really well in that regard. Could have done with maybe having Bundy at his best, but the reality is he was at his best for about 2 years. It was always going to come down a small bit, and you're going to miss that incredible impact. But ultimately, there will be question marks. There will be question marks about the defence. I mentioned it beforehand. How would South Africa look to exploit Ireland outside the 13 channel, that connect between the 13 and the wing? I think they did it really well. Owen, you mentioned Willie LaRue coming in there. Obviously, you have to pay respect to Colby and to Arendse and maybe Quadra Smith as an edge forward as well. And they're all worth noting. But I still think Ireland, with better execution, some better tackling, some better handling, at times some needless penalties were scattered in there. I think they could have got that result, and that's where that feeling of what could have been comes in. And David, I'm going to bring you in here now because the bench was always going to be a key factor. I put it up on Twitter last night and got a very mixed reaction about Ireland's bench. Personally, I don't think they were at the level that we needed them to be at, especially considering we were chasing the game. 6-2, 5-3, doesn't really matter. This was always going to be decisive. What did you make of Ireland's bench, but also South Africa's?
I think the disparity wasn't as great as I think some of us thought it was going to be going off of the actual personnel involved. I think you look at that South African bench, it looks very scary at a glance, and they do the nice psychological thing of bringing the ball on at once, and that's intimidating. You bring on 6 forwards at once, and it's an intimidating sight.
It saves time too. We're not going to the bench every 2 minutes. It's just all done.
Yeah, no, it's practical. It works out. I did think it was kind of funny, just because I noticed. I think Bernard Jackman was posting about the impact of the bomb squad, and that penalty try was fantastic. I mean, that's the kind of demolition job scrum coaches on East Side alternatively dream of and have nightmares about. But the first thing the bomb squad did when they came off the bench was give away a scrum penalty, which I thought was quite funny. But I thought outside of that, Ireland's bench was more built for, kind of as Owen was saying about the way we're picking players in general, it was more built for utility. We have a lot of things covered. I think the only real standout concern on that bench would be when Andrew Porter had to come off earlier than would have been planned for a blood substitution, and Keane Heady had to go out there. I think that was on about 53 minutes, and I was a little bit concerned at the idea of Keane Heady having to go 30 minutes at altitude. Outside of that, I thought it was just a bench that would keep us covered. I think James Ryan and Ryan Baird as a pair of impact players are that is a nice little boost that we haven't necessarily had in the past. With Joe McCarthy's rise as a starter, having James Ryan to come off the bench and make an impact is a huge boost. Ryan Baird is possibly in a position where he's going to start pushing for a starting spot soon, but I thought he's a very nice impact sub to come off the bench too. With our decision to go 5-3 rather than 6-2, I don't know. I kind of felt like Kieran Frawley was an interesting player to have on the bench, who possibly went a little bit to waste, just insofar as, yes, Jamie Osborne's quite young, but I like when he came on the field, I actually had to check a couple of times to make sure he was out there and Osborne wasn't. It didn't really feel like, it felt like, if something happens to Osborne, if something happens to Crowley, we can bring Frawley in. But it didn't really feel like it was going to be a game-changing substitution. I think you said yourself before the match, it felt like a bench to see out a game rather than a bench to chase it. In terms of heavy impact, the only real player I thought who would bring big impact off our bench was Gary Ringrose. who would usually be a starter. So in the end, I don't know that I felt, that the benches were going to be that decisive. I think if not for James Lowe dropping a ball over his own dead in ball area, if it would have been, but when push came to shove and the opportunity to demolish a scrum came up, the bomb squad came up trumps. And I think while the overall impacts of the benches weren't hugely decisive in the moment that was given to the Springboks, that plan ultimately bore the fruit that gave them a 7-point win in the end. I think it's going to be very interesting to watch. I'm going to try and pronounce his name. Zulu. He seems like a really promising player. He's listed as a fly half, even though I think he's played most of his games this season at 12. But yeah, he seems like a really promising player in a position that there's been a lot of shifting between Pollard and Lebok. So yeah, I thought ultimately the South African bench probably edged it, but there wasn't as much in it as I think we thought there was going to be.
Just quickly before we move off Ireland's bench, because I want to get into that, Thala, if Sasha Feinberg and Gabzalu is going to get minutes for South Africa, where do you think they're going to be? Because anyone who's watched him at URC level know he's a bright spark, he's an unbelievable player. But geez, Damien de Allende turned up again yesterday and had one of his best performances, and that's before you consider Andre Estesen at who can also play inside centre as well. So you think we'll see much minutes for Sasha?
Yeah, look, I think Sasha's ahead of schedule, basically. He's just a ridiculously talented player, and every South African is super excited to have him be a permanent fixture of the team. But I think he's basically filling the Damon Willemse role before he became the permanent fullback. So his role in 2022, which is you're the utility player that can come in pretty much anywhere when we need you to come in. So yesterday he came in as a fly half. He could have maybe even come in a bit earlier if it wasn't a second test, because Paulo was having a bit of a mare with the kicking boot. And yeah, Ngomazulu has been one of the most consistent kickers in the URC this season. I think his immediate future is that utility role. And if, let's say, Pollard is ruled out to play on Saturday, Ngomazulu's not going to start at 10. It'll probably be Lebok that starts at 10, and Sasha plays in that 23 role. So I think until Willemse comes back, which he should be coming back, I think around the Rugby Championship, Ngomazulu is going to be playing as the player 23. And then after that, if the team gets to full strength, I think he'll be more of a squad player that maybe comes in for we don't have too many easier tests this season, but maybe the Argentina game late in the season. We have Wales at Cardiff late in the season. And if captains continue to run them, that might be an easier game. But yeah, that will probably be the test that Ngomazulu plays. And then I think his long-term future is definitely at 10. I don't think he'll play. I don't think he'll start a game at 12. He's more likely to start a game at 15 than at 12.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because he's one player that I mentioned in the preview. I'm excited to see him play, because especially with the Tony Brown attack coming in there, and having guys like Aronson and Colby, I decide if he does play fullback, or Creel if he plays 12 or whatever. I think he's the type of player like Damien Willemse that you mentioned that can be that spark, that person who you can just plug in anywhere. He'll do a job, he'll bring energy. And I actually think he did well off the bench in his 10 or so minutes that he got. I actually think he did really well. And I might just come back to you on the Irish bench, because again, this is a talking point that we've had at many different points. Ireland did have to make two early changes. Kelleher and Henshaw came off. Sheehan and Henshaw came off. Kelleher and Ringrose came in for them. Obviously, Craig Casey gets hurt. McCarthy and O'Mahony come off after 50 minutes. Ireland have half their bench used after 50 minutes. There was no bomb squad disposal, kind of in the way that we've seen before. But it's very hard to be overly positive with most. I think James Ryan, Ryan Baird, Conor Murray, Gary Ringrose, they had nice touches, but ultimately, we're just going to remember that scrum. As cruel as it seems, that's what this game is going to be remembered by, is that scrum. And Gerhard Steenkamp and Vincent Koch giving two experienced Ireland props their wings, which is not something we expected to say.
Yeah, and look, I think it's certainly not going to get any better on the loosehead side, because look, that's an inherent problem that Andy Farrell has had and hasn't addressed for God knows how many years now at this point. We've left Jeremy Lockman at home. He's been there. They have stuck with Cian Healy all the way through. I think he's coming to the end of his career now, and I think, look, we're seeing that there's starting to be a drop off on that. He can't. Cian Healy is not a guy that you want on the pitch for more than 15, 20 minutes at this level, I think. And that's designed in terms of Porter needs to be on the pitch for 60 or 70 minutes for Farrell's game plan to work. But you can't also put Healy on for any more than that because the drop off is so big. We've only brought effectively two loose heads on tour. So we only have Healy as the backup here. And because you have Tom O'Toole is the other one, but he hasn't played actually. In as far as I'm aware, he hasn't played any live minutes at Loosehead. So we have Cian Healy there, and we need to cross our fingers, toes, and everything else that Porter's cut to his hand doesn't have complications later on this week, because that would be a humongous blow for Ireland. In terms of changes and what they can do, potentially, I think you could change. I think Ollie Jaeger is a stronger scrummager to Finlay Bealham. You could move that in. If Dan Sheehan, as expected, misses out next week, I think there also is the option that potentially what you do is you keep Ronan Kelleher as the bench option, so that you put in Healy, Kelleher, and Jaeger as a stronger three scrummaging unit, front row unit, and you start Herring. And potentially there's the question then whether you start James Ryan as well in the second row with Tyke Byrne, and have Herring as the hooker, which solidifies the line out options and gives you a better line out platform potentially to use. It potentially weakens the scrum a bit, but I think they might live with that because you're going to have less scrums than you are going to have lineouts. You've got options then around. You're going to see, I think, Conor Murray play 75 minutes next week, because as far as I'm concerned, Andy Farrell works on a very simple thing, which is from Meet the Fockers, you're either in the circle of trust or you're not. And as far as I'm concerned, Caelan Blade is not in that circle of trust yet. So he will be limited in the amount of time that he's allowed on the pitch. I think you've then got Robbie Henshaw will be missing, or potentially missing from that. The obvious one there is just to bring in Gary Ringrose, and I think that's what they'll do. That should help solidify the defensive situation, but it limits then again what we're doing in attack, because Farrell loves his centers. He loves, I think it's almost a rugby league type thing where he tries to get as many flanker centers as he can on the pitch and in that role set. So you look at the entire back five of the pack, you look at the two centers, and now what he's trying to do with Jamie Osborne at 15. And I think all that is to try and add that element of Bosch, that element of sort of back row center play that needs to get over the gain line when things go and they get into either the red zone or whether they need to get over the gain line. And I think that's why I think if fit, I would expect Osborne to be played again at 15, despite the struggles that he had in being moved around. I think they'll stick with that, and it's something I think, given the fullback options that Ireland have brought on the tour, none of them are really fullbacks either. So you have, like, it's Stockdale, who hasn't played fullback for God knows how long regularly. Jimmy O'Brien again, part-time fullback, and who else am I missing? And Jordan Larmour again. There's no regular fullback within this entire squad of 30 odd players. So I'm and Frawley is the other option that you could put back there. Again, Frawley probably has the most experience, but I think for this point, with the kicking, the left boot, the whole lot, I'd stick with Osborne at fullback, and do that. I'm not sure what else you could really change up, because I don't see, or say, there are certain things you could do, but I don't see necessarily Farrell doing them because of that sort of circle of trust. He has the faith. He sticks with the players. It's one of the great, I think, downsides of Irish rugby is it's harder to get out of an Ireland team and out of an Ireland squad than it basically is to get into it. And Farrell is over loyal to the players.
And there's probably an element as well for an interest of balance. After the England game, we had similar conversations, sometimes about similar players, say O'Mahony and Fantafleer, say McCarthy, say Andrew Porter, for instance, the midfield of Aki and Henshaw. and they went for an almost unchanged team for that Scotland game. And most of those players actually were the ones who performed the following week. And I think Andy Farrell will have that in the back of his mind. But yeah, at the same time, if you're asking me, who would you like to see come in there? I think the two players that jump off the page to me is Stuart McCloskey and Nick Timoney. Timoney as a more explosive option off the bench in terms of physical contact, and just McCloskey because ultimately, like it almost feels like, well, his stock rises when he doesn't play. He's been brilliant for Ireland when given the chance. He's been brilliant on a bad Ulster team this season, and maybe a bit of freshness would be no harm. If you do go McCluskey and Ringrose, you're not. I understand you're not changing what you want from your centres, but maybe you get a bit of a reaction out of him and going forward. David, I might just throw another one at you about because we were asked about the bench in listener questions and things like that, and some good questions, but kind of on the same side of the coin. Sometimes you learn a lot about the players who aren't there. We mentioned Hugo Keenan earlier and his loss, and it does feel like Keenan, for example, I mentioned Ian Henderson earlier. These are the guys we learned more about, and we learned how important someone like Keenan is to that Irish game plan. Yes, Jamie Osborne was good, but I actually look at Jamie Osborne after yesterday and think he's probably one of the guys I want in a 6-2 bench more than anything else, having watched it yesterday. So do you think we learned more about certain players, even Craig Casey, who we hope is okay after the knock, probably learned a whole lot about him in his cameo yesterday as well?
Yeah, to go in reverse, I mean, I think there was a lot of talk around Osborne. Obviously, it's his debut, but this was definitely Craig Casey's biggest start. You know, he's had 4 starts for Ireland before this, 3 against Italy, 1 against the USA. He's been a very solid, reliable player for Munster all season, but he hasn't had the top line starting minutes for Ireland up until this game. And with how important Gibson Park is to Ireland's attack, I think there was a lot of concern. And I think he answered a lot of those questions. He was very good. He was quick. His delivery is very similar to Gibson Park's, and you know, I mean, his only downside is he is only a little guy, but I mean, he really didn't.
All right, Rassie. All right.
I mean, he is. Don't pick and go, kid. You're going to get picked up and thrown back. But his delivery was brilliant, and he in a very, you know, particularly against a team like a Springboks who love a counter ruck, who love to harry and harass the 9. You know, I think he stood up very well, and it is a great shame that he's almost certainly not going to be playing next week, because it would have been a nice to see him back that up. I think Jamie Osborne, I was worried about him from the start, because, you know, he had that obviously the try from Aronset, and then the drop ball over, the unnecessary attempt to catch a ball that was probably gone dead anyway, out of the touchline. But he settled himself, and he gets the try back, and he finishes out the game well. He had some good defensive moments then too. I think it's probably too early in his career to really know whether he's going to end up being our fullback, or he's played a lot for Leinster at 12 and looked quite good there. As you say yourself, he'd be a good 23 because he does provide that kind of cover. I think but you're right, we did miss Keenan. I mean, I said it was very hard to stop Curtly Aronson one-on-one. Hugo Keenan's probably one of the players who can do it. And, you know, Farrell gets a lot of shtick for not having more options at 15. And, you know, certainly I would have been, you know, I'm a big fan of Mike Haley. He's probably the most like for like 15 replacement. The problem with someone like Keenan is that he's so good, and up until this year so durable, that when he's fit, you just play him all the time. There are only 10 or 11 test matches every year. Maybe 1 or 2 of them aren't ultra competitive, so there isn't that much space at test level for experimentation. But I thought, yeah, when it comes down to it and you don't have someone like Keenan, those are the moments you realize not even just the attacking stuff or the incredible backfield cover, but the other little moments that he has in there that you do miss. I think, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens next week now with some of the force changes we're going to have to make. Obviously the 2 biggest ones are the centers. That's not really that big a change, because it is just McCloskey and Ringrose, who are both tried and tested players. I think the change at scrum half would have been more interesting if it wasn't for the fact that it's Caelan Blade is on the bench. and I was very kind of thrown by Farrell's decision to bring him, because he didn't feel like a player, particularly after this season. You know, he's had good seasons with Connacht. I didn't think this was necessarily one of them. So I don't know. It'll be, if there's anyone we learn anything more about next week in Durban, I'd say it'll be if Jamie Osborne gets played again. But other than that, it'll just be first signers who have been in and out of the team, people like Murray, people like McCluskey, who get back into those starting spots that they haven't been in recently. And it could be a really nice way for Conor Murray to, you know, this might be one of his last tours. So it could be a really nice way for him to finish out.
And to be fair, he was excellent off the bench yesterday.
Yeah.
I thought, like, I seen one or two people throwing shots at him because he tried to kick a ball after Ireland lost possession in a ruck when they had the advantage. But like, just go for it. He knows he kicks that ball, we either score or you're going back to the penalty. Like, he's not, like, he's 34 years of age. He knows the game.
Yeah, and it's far more criminal to have advantage and not try anything.
Yeah,
So,
there's that side of it as well. Unless it's a knock-on advantage and they hoof it 30 yards down the field and the referee comes back, which grinds my gears, but that's a different podcast on things that grind your gears in rugby. Thala, our own wants to jump in before we...
Yeah, just one other thing I think Ireland need to figure out fairly quickly is who is going to be the captain when Peter O'Mahony goes off. Because Peter O'Mahony is going to be substituted off at round about 60 minutes. But Ireland have to find, and it's not necessarily a leader. That's not what you're looking for. You're looking for someone who can manage the referee. Because what we saw yesterday was a continuation from what we've seen with the Leinster co-captain situation with Ringrose and James Ryan, where we have players who don't seem to be able to manage that relationship with the referee effectively. You had Doris been told multiple times, you've asked that, I've given you the answer, go away from me. And the relationship is breaking down. And we need to find someone who can manage that properly, who can still challenge the referee, but do it in a way that doesn't put us on the bad side. And I think that's a bigger question for me than necessarily, you know, who we swap in and out, because those sort of managing the referee has now become one of the more crucial things within the sort of a test match. It's not necessarily being able to move it, but if you can get your opinion across to the referee and influence him in terms of whether it's the breakdown or whatever specifically you need to get across, that's far more important potentially than getting even a penalty kick over the bar. It's worth more than 3 points in a lot of cases if you can do it right. And I think we've tried a couple of players, it hasn't worked, and we need to find someone who can actually do that properly.
And it's worth noting as well, this has been an issue for Ireland since probably 2015 or 2016. Like, a lot of people say, oh, Ireland manage referees well. Historically, we don't. It's probably been the one thing we haven't done well throughout the Schmidt era and throughout the Andy Farrell era, is we probably don't adapt to different referees. Ireland, under Andy Farrell, at their brilliant best, they have one gear, and that gear is very high, and they steamroll teams. But when they have to adapt, and when you say, maybe challenge Luke Pearson the right way, for instance, who's a very headstrong referee who backs himself and his own abilities, that's probably where you would have had concerns. And after the first interaction, you probably had concerns if you listened in. And obviously it went from there. I don't think Caelan Doris was wrong to challenge him when he did for the try or for the tackle on Craig Casey.
No, not at all. Totally.
But it's getting on the right side. And it takes time, as you kind of alluded to. It takes time to build up that rapport with different referees. And I think if there is a different referee in place next week, and say it's, I don't know who's refereeing next week, but
it's Carl Dixon.
Anyways, that's not much better, to be honest. Carl Dixon doesn't exactly get on with the provinces. But if it's, let's say it was someone else, and let's say it was, you know, Angus Gardner or someone who was supposed to have this test, I think that would have been a good example to kind of, you know, try and get used to them and get familiar with them. And maybe there's an element of that Leinster thing, or, you know, having Northern Hemisphere refs who are used to you and will, you know, referees want to be on their own 2 feet as well, even if, yes, they may not have shown that. But anyways, Thala, I want to finish off the South African chat for a minute with yourself. South Africa have the 1-0 series lead now. how do you think they go about next week? Firstly, do you think they'll do it? Do you think they'll make it 2-0 and whitewash Ireland? But in terms of selection and things, do you expect much changes heading into next week?
Look, the Boks are definitely going for the whitewash. That's quite clear from what the team, the players, the fans, everyone's gone and said basically that this is a very important test series for them. I don't expect too much change apart from maybe Evan Rose starting for Kwagga Smith. Yeah, unfortunately for Kwagga, I think he's number one, a lot better as an impact player. I think when he comes on in the last 20, 30 minutes, he knows how to cause havoc. And I think his game is extended that way. But like Owen said earlier, like his role now with Peter Stephan and Siya Kolisi basically playing on the trams is very important. So I wonder if maybe if someone like Evan Rust starts, maybe he would be one of the forwards on the trams and Kolisi be that person in the middle trying to get to every ruck because yeah, Kolisi's injured. Look, I mean, I know he's gained a few kilograms according to the Racing owner. But his ability to really just be mobile and get to the rucks, like that's probably one of his best skills. So I've stopped trying to second guess Rassie, but I would maybe start Evan Rus at 8, have Kwagga on the bench instead of Marco van Staden. Just be able to shore that role up, have Kolisi be sort of the Kwagga Smith role. And then obviously in the second half, when Kwagga comes on for the last 13 minutes, he can cause absolute havoc. Apart from that, it doesn't seem like there were too many injury concerns from the game. I think everyone came out of it relatively unscathed. Faf had that sort of niggling injury. He didn't look at his best, but I think for the players that didn't play well, Faf, Andre Pollard, Willie Leroux's passes were just all going forward for whatever reason. I think all of them get better with another week of rugby. This game, the Durban game, is probably our last big game up until we go to Australia, which has been almost a bogey country for South Africa for a long time. Assuming that we play a completely new 23 pretty much against Portugal. So yeah, I think this is going to be the last big hit out for a lot of the first choice players. So I think there's an element of just keep the same thing going. Obviously, Ireland have, they're at the end of I mean, to be fair, South Africa's also, I don't even know if we're at the end of the season. We're at a never-ending 4 seasons now because of the whole Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere situation. But yeah, Ireland's going to be at the end of the season, but I think South African team is going to be told to just go to the well once again and to go there. And just thinking about it now quickly, another possible change might be Thomas du Toit coming for Gerard Steenkamp, because I mean Steenkamp had a fantastic game. I think he was really good off the bench. He was really, he's done well for the Bulls. He was active around the field. Obviously, we saw what he did in the scrum. But yeah, maybe to give Thomas du Toit a chance. But yeah, it wouldn't necessarily be because of performance. I think the 23 that played, apart from maybe Evan Rose coming, will probably play again next week.
And I think that would really help Caelan Doris's case as captain. It's like I'm the nicer one of the number 8s because Evan Rose is just going to be picking on someone all day anyways, which I do respect. I won't respect it in those 80 minutes, but I do in general. Before we leave it, Owen, I'll come to yourself next week. Ireland's last test of the series and of the season. How do you see it going next week?
I see it similar to this week. I think the injuries that Ireland have gotten, I think will be too much for them. I think they'll still put in a decent performance and it'll be a fairly good test match, but I don't see Ireland winning next week.
David, I'll come to yourself.
I think it'll be a 1-score game, but I think we'll swing it. I think not the last time, sorry, 2022, when we played them, we had I think McCluskey starting with Jimmy O'Brien of all people at 13. So I think if we have McCluskey and Ringer in the centres, I think that could add the necessary punch, and just having the team have a week extra get settled, 1 score in each direction. I think that it's always going to come down to a coin flip, but I don't think this Andy Farrell team is going to lose 2 games in a row.
Thala, I'll come to yourself.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's probably my biggest worry as a Springbok fan, that this team is way too good to lose two in a row. Like, I think Springboks will have to perform a lot better than they did last week. Yeah, it's great because I think both teams have the opportunity to improve. I would also, I mean, yeah, I think you talked about it with having McCloskey start. Banyaki as a bench option is really scary. I think if there was maybe less things to be scared about with the Ireland bench last weekend, Banyaki coming for the last 20 minutes is ridiculously intimidating for any team. So having that as a possible option, maybe if someone like Onyega starts instead of Tank Furlong, you have. I think if he won't, I mean, Owen has talked about it, but if Andy Farrell could, mix up the team just with one or two changes, obviously with the injuries as well, there's a big possibility of the freshness and having some of your better players coming off the bench, having sort of that bomb squad effect. Like that will be something that I think could carry Ireland over. Because look, I think how Ireland started, it was almost like they were just adjusting to the intensity that the Boks had. They're falling off tackles. They're coming second best in the contact area. But once they got wind of it, if I can put it like that, they were fine. And that's been the pattern for the last two test matches, or the two test matches before that with South Africa and Ireland. Ireland doesn't have any problem with physicality. It's just the fact that South Africa, because of the fact that they can put in a new tight five that's the same level as the previous tight five, they have the edge at the end. So I don't have to find advantages in other places. So yeah, maybe if Aki is coming off the bench, maybe you mix around with the props and the hookers, as was suggested earlier. Nick Timoney also could be a possible option. Yeah, those things could maybe be the things that pull Ireland through in the last 20 minutes. But to be fair, I mean, Ireland basically lost the game by allowing that relatively soft try to Ireland. So, like, trying to play from behind, unless you're Glasgow Warriors, trying to play from behind in Loftus is never the best thing in the world.
Gonna have to cut that bit out now. Thanks very much, Thala. I don't edit, but like I can't be allowing that to be said on this podcast.
I had to dig it in for myself. Yeah, I mean, we will unite with Munster fans about our hate for Glasgow now as Bulls fans.
Good. At least we're hating on the same thing for a change. I said before the series, I know Thala, you called as well before the series. I think it'll finish 1-1. Yes, it did give me a lot of room for concern, as Owen mentioned, with the injuries and possibly form. And I think Ireland looked tired. Like it's been a long season for these lads, and without kind of punching down, there's been a lot of South African players, key players, who haven't played the same quality of games as the Ireland players have at club level. Like be it in Japan or even Etzebeth has played like three unbelievable world class games for the Sharks and just packed it in besides because he can. But I think Ireland need a big performance. Like losing two games in a bounce, it's not something that happens often, but they just can't let that happen, really. Do you know? Because then I think you start getting into the conversations of did England lay down a platform as to how to beat Ireland? Because Scotland rattled them, South Africa got the job done. Obviously, England scraped over the line, and that just won't be fun. No one enjoys those conversations at the crux of it. I'll back Ireland, but there will be a preview during the week where my nerves could dictate the prediction come that time as well. Owen, David, Thala, thank you very much for joining me this morning. It's been a brilliant chat to look back on a cracking opening test. We do hope next week delivers. I will hopefully be back with under 20s and Ireland senior coverage. But for now and until next time, thanks to everyone home for listening and to my brilliant panel. Until next time, take it easy.